A Spell of Good Things is a novel about two families. From each family, we have an anchor character. And from one end of the divide is a young boy, is a teenager. His family is very down on their luck, and they are getting to the point where they can't afford to send him to school anymore. And he's become quite desperate to continue his education in any way that he can. On the other end of the divide, we have a young doctor who's in her first year of practicing as a physician. And she's very exhausted because she doesn't have as much support as she needs within the hospital system. She's also involved in a romantic relationship that many people around her think is perfect, but she's coming to realize that it's not right for her and she has to make a decision. And that's what this book is about. It's about these two families. It's about the city that they live in. In many ways, it's also about the country that they're living in. The first cultural experience that I must have had is not one that I remember, although it still continues to mean much to me. It must have been my naming ceremony, which is usually about 8 days after a child is born. And it involves members of the family gathering and names being given to a child very thoughtfully and carefully. I think it continues to impact the way I do my work. When I think about my characters, it takes a while for me to give them names, and the names are always significant in relation to the family that they come from, the position that they occupy in the novels. So I think that even though it's an experience that I don't necessarily have a memory of, it's one that has really inspired me and continues to inform my work in many ways. The book that I tend to recommend the most, particularly to friends and people that I know are also interested in writing fiction, or people who just love to read, is Woofall by Hilary Mantel. It was quite an experience for me the first time I read it. It was it transported me in a way that only the very best of literature can. So I really recommend it to people, particularly people who want to write as a masterclass in storytelling. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is from my mother. And she told me once that, everyone's life makes sense to them. It might not make sense to you, but to them, they have a narrative by which they explain themselves and their choices and where they are in life. And it helps me in different ways. It helps me when I'm particularly upset with someone to give them some grace, because, their life makes sense to them and they have their own reasons for what they're doing. I might not agree with it, but within themselves, they have an internal logic to their choices. I think it also helps me as a writer because it's a question that I ask myself of every single character, whether I like them, whether I despise them. I really try to ask myself, what is the narrative by which this person explains their lives? I think that question can yield a lot of complexity in fiction in particular. What makes me hopeful what keeps me hopeful is really love. It's the possibility of love and more love as life continues to unfold. Yeah, I guess it's the most important thing to me, and all the ways that it can grow in my life keep me very hopeful.